I don't think, oh, is this on? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Grace. I'm the president of NAMI on campus. NAMI stands for the National Alliance of Mental Illness. We're a support for mental health and advocacy at CU Boulder. We just kind of want to create a place where there's no stigma and a place where people can have a fun time at Boulder and get involved. Just, yeah, a fun way to get involved. We have like a lot of volunteer opportunities and events. So if you guys are interested, we have a QR code on our door outside, or come and talk to me after the event today. But yeah, we're so excited to have our guest speakers, Jason Wood, author and advanced speaker with us, and former Olympic athlete, Danny O'Connor. And with that, I will turn it over to Jason.
So much. There we go. I think we're ready to go. All right. So thanks so much for having me tonight. It's great to be here. It's great to be in person. I've talked to students here on campus before, but it's always been virtually. So it's really nice to be here on campus. It's also great. We've got over 800 people watching right now online. So hello to everybody. Turn it up. Let's see. Oh yeah. Does that help at all? No? Hmm. Hmm. AT. Yeah, the mic. Yeah, if we could get the mic. Yeah.
Increasing so slow.
Yeah.
I've not seen that.
See, my computer is possessed today, people. It has been like this all day. All right. Should I just try the other microphone? Oh, there we go. All right. All right. So the microphone's just moving a little bit slow. But anyway, so it's great to be here tonight with everybody. I'll go ahead and get started. One of the questions that always gets me is when I hear people ask me, do you see yourself in 5 years? And if you would have asked me that question 5 years ago, standing here tonight in front of all of you, sharing my story with an eating disorder in my recovery journey, would have probably been the last thing on my mind. This is not the direction that I saw my life going. If I go back to 2020, February of 2020, so this is pre-pandemic still, life was going pretty good, I thought. I had just married the man of my dreams. We had just moved out here to Colorado to start new adventures together. I had just started what I thought was going to be my dream job. I was working out 1 or 2 times a day, eating healthy. I thought I was in the best shape of my life. I was meeting new friends, enjoying the local bar scene. Life was horrible. I was falling apart on the inside. Internally, I had years of suppressed grief and pain just gnawing away at me. I had insecurities just running wild in my mind. I was becoming a hostage to the gym, to the scale, to the mirror, to that bullying voice inside my mind. And my relationship with diet, exercise, and alcohol was starting to get in the way of my relationship with my husband. So while on the outside, everything looked like it was going great, inside was a completely different story. And I didn't really think anything was wrong. I figured people go through bad times, people go through challenges. It's not all that bad. It'll pass. The thought of an eating disorder never once crossed my mind. I didn't think it could happen to me. Eating disorders don't happen to guys. Men don't battle eating disorders. And plus, guys don't ask for help anyway. We don't go there. We stay quiet, you know, stay quiet, strong, and keep moving forward. But little did I know that this stigma and this stereotype that I had sold myself for so long almost cost me my life. And that's where I found myself in 2020. It would be in the summer of 2020 when I would spiral into rock bottom. So these things that I was wearing as like a badge of honor or trying to tell other people to be proud of me about when it came to diet or exercise or just my life in general were more like a boulder being tied to my feet and being pushed off a cliff. And I was just on a one-way direction down to rock bottom. So that's where I was 5 years ago. And now here tonight, I am standing in front of all of you to talk about my journey and my recovery. So like I said, life was good. We were at an Avs game in this picture. I was smiling. This was at the height of my eating disorder. And I wanted to show this picture first because I think it's so important, because people think eating disorders have a look, or you can tell if somebody's battling a mental health issue right now. But that's not always the case. You've seen the pictures probably online of individuals prior to a suicide attempt, where they're dancing and they're having fun with their family, but they've got these struggles that are going on the inside. The same thing can be said for eating disorders. So yeah, if we take a look back, this picture was almost exactly 5 years ago to the day. So how did I get there in the first place? It was a perfect storm of things. And that's another important reminder to keep in mind tonight about eating disorders. It's that it's a perfect storm. They don't just develop overnight. It's not like you just wake up one morning and you're like, I'm gonna start restricting, or I'm not gonna eat lunch, or I wanna have an eating disorder. No, it doesn't go like that. It's a combination of all of these different factors coming together and creating, like I said, the perfect storm. The first thing were those insecurities. As a kid, I was overweight and I was picked on and bullied in school for being overweight. I knew the moment I walked in that door that the students already labeled me as the fat kid, and that was going to be my identity for the rest of the school year. So those insecurities started at a very young age. There was also a need for perfection. I'm a type A personality for sure. Everything's got to be perfect. A's aren't good enough. It's got to be A pluses. Getting a good job on something's not good enough. It's got to be a great job. So it was very difficult for me when I was introduced to dieting. And I was like, ooh, I got to be perfect at dieting now. Like, I went to Weight Watchers. That was my first introduction into formalized dieting. And I remember sitting there studying everything. And I was like, I'm going to be perfect at this. I'm going to ace this exam. But again, it was almost an exam that cost me my life. There was also trauma. I lost both of my parents in my teenage years. My dad actually passed away when I was 11. My mom passed away when I was 19. And their deaths rocked my world. I lost my dad, my best friend, the man that I was looking up to as I was starting to enter my adolescent years, those very formative years. And then here I was, 19 years old, right out of high school, and my mom passes away. And I suddenly found myself completely alone and isolated. But I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't want to ask for help. I didn't want to look weak. I just kind of said, everything's fine. I'll keep going along. I'm a survivor, whatever, I got this. I suppressed that trauma and that grief for nearly 2 decades, and it was literally eating away at me. There's also the control factor, and I think that that's something that I hear a lot from people who are battling an eating disorder, is we're looking for some sort of control. For me, my life felt like it was spiraling out of control after my mom passed away. I went through financial hardships. I went through legal troubles. I was arrested at one point. I fell into drugs and alcohol. Life was going pretty rough. And I was looking for any way I could to try to control things and to try to get a grasp on things. So what came easy for me? Food. That's something we face every single day. So if I could control food, maybe I could at least control some aspect of my life. All those things I just mentioned about being arrested and drugs and alcohol and all of that led to that failure that's up there. And if you look, perfection and then failure, those two things don't go too well together. Usually when you combine that, you end up getting a tornado like this. Usually you start to get a perfect storm created. And then the last thing, the catalyst, was a health scare. My dad died of colorectal cancer. At 29, I started to exhibit the same symptoms he did. And that scared me. That was like, wow, here I am so young and I'm already experiencing some of the symptoms that my dad had. Went to the doctor and they found that I had three precancerous polyps that were very close to turning cancerous. And that was just like a big wake up call. I was like, I'm not doing enough to eat healthy or eat clean enough. Like, I'm gonna get disease from this food. So that was when I doubled down. I'd already had that disordered relationship with food since I started Weight Watchers and then went through the trauma. But then when I had that health scare, that's when I was like, all right, nothing but eating clean and healthy, and I'm going to take care of myself and prevent disease. But by trying to prevent disease, I almost lost my life. So what is orthorexia? That's what I battled. And oftentimes people will be like, ortho what? I've never heard of this term before. Well, there's one reason why you've never heard of it is because it's not in the DSM yet. It's not a classified diagnosis, but believe me, it's something that's very real. Orthorexia is basically an obsession or a fixation with healthy eating. So in my case, I was more worried about the quality of the food over the quantity of the food. And I think that's an important thing to remember too, because we kind of have it in our minds like eating disorders, anorexia and bulimia, restriction and purging. But there's a wide spectrum of eating disorders. And in my case, it was more about what type of food I was eating. It had to be the cleanest, it had to be the healthiest. I was making all of these substitutions with ingredients to make sure that I was adhering to the different food rules. And that expression is basically what it feels like to have orthorexia all the time. The mind is constantly like this, especially when you're at a restaurant like that. These are 6 of the warning signs that I could identify from my own situation. And the first one was lost hours. I was spending hours upon hours researching restaurant menus, researching nutritional blogs, I'd go to the grocery store and I'd study all of the nutritional labels because I needed to know what the healthiest options were going to be. I needed to know what the latest food trends were. When we would go on vacation, I would literally identify the town we were going to, look up all the restaurants that were there, and then look at those restaurants' menus to make sure I could find the healthiest option at the healthiest restaurant while we were on vacation. Yeah, I was not a very fun person to travel with back in those days. I was also living in a very isolated bubble because that's what an eating disorder loves to do to you. What started as just a carefree kind of, I want to diet, I want to lose some weight, I want to take care of myself, turned into a full-blown obsession. And I became withdrawn from society. I would make excuses so that I wouldn't have to break my food rules. I'd intentionally schedule like work parties for times where I would be out of the office or I would be in a meeting or busy, so I wouldn't have to worry about eating so-and-so's whatever they made at the potluck. Or if friends would reach out at the last moment and be like, hey, you want to grab dinner with me tonight? No, that was like the worst possible thing because that wasn't part of my plan. That wasn't part of the food rules. So I became a very isolated person. There were also no rest days for me. I was working out, as I mentioned there in the opening, 1 to 2 times a day, every single day, and I could not take one day off from the gym. If I was not in the gym, I felt like a failure, going back to that previous slide. It was very hard to allow my body the physical rest that it needed because we kind of live in a society where if you don't work out all the time, you're lazy. Like something's wrong with you. You've always got to get to the gym, always got to get to you got to burn something off or do this or do that. So rest days were out of the question. I was also living in healthified hell. And the way that I kind of explain this is with a cauliflower crust pizza. So my husband had made, or I had talked my husband into making us a cauliflower crust pizza one time because I couldn't have regular crust anymore because I'd seen it on some blog or something that it was horrible for you. Mind you, I'm not celiac. I did not have to be gluten-free, but I had convinced myself at that point that I did. So he worked all day to make this cauliflower crust pizza. And if you've ever made one from scratch, it's not fun. You have to like bake it a couple times and then strain it and then press it into a crust. Cauliflower is just not meant to be a pizza crust, like at the end of the day. So he had to put all this effort into it. I took one bite and it was horrible. It was nasty, like the most disgusting thing I've ever eaten. But I told myself at that point, I'll get used to it. It's an acquired taste. Like this is what I got to eat moving forward. So this is what I'll have to do. And that's just one example. It was countless things out there with different sugars or sweeteners or flour or whatever. There's alternatives to everything these days. And in some cases, those are good. They do help you. I have diabetes, so I need to be able to have like a sugar alternative. But unfortunately, people start to abuse these things. They start to think that they have to do this and it's going to make or break them. And unless you really have a medical condition that requires it, like you can go ahead and have these things. As you can imagine, I had little variety left in my diet. I was eating the same things every single day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because my list of good foods was growing or was getting really tiny, and my list of bad foods was growing exponentially. I would look online to see what the latest, trends were, what the news articles were saying. One day coffee is great for you, the next day coffee is bad for you, the next day chocolate's great for you, the next day it's bad for you. It even got to the point where things like berries were cut out of my diet because I was convinced the sugars in those would cause the cancer I was trying to keep away with my dad's cancer. So it's great that we've got the internet, amazing resources out there, but sometimes it's a little too much information at our fingertips. So be very mindful as you're reading different things, because every food, you can find an article why it's good and why it's bad, I guarantee you. And then the last thing is I was ordering for my eating disorder. When I would go out to a restaurant, I was ordering what my eating disorder wanted to eat. I wasn't eating what I wanted to eat. I was eating what I thought was going to be the healthiest thing on the menu. The same thing could apply when I was going to the grocery store. Again, I would turn around all the food labels and look to see what the healthiest things were going to be. And that would dictate whether I could put it in my cart or whether it had to go back up on the shelf. So there was no joy in food anymore. It was simply just to eat the healthiest, cleanest, purest thing I could possibly find. It was a miserable place to be. And one of the reasons why I was stuck there is because of my good friend and enemy, diet culture. It is everywhere we go these days. It's so normalized in our society to say these different things around food, to apply moral values to food, where they're either good food or bad food or guilty food or innocent food. It's like food is not a criminal, it's not a crime. It should be enjoyed. But you go to a store right now and walk down the aisle and you'll see all of these labels, all of this marketing that's constantly being thrown our way on why this is a good food, why that's a bad food. I'm a big fan of Shark Tank. I love that show, but it always gets me because there are always new entrepreneurs on there telling me that this is the good food that's going to cure all their problems and make your life wonderful. It's not like that. Like food is not, again, not that make or break, not good or bad. We'll kind of dive into it a little bit more here, but we really need to redefine the way that we talk around food. Don't be that person that says, oh, I'm gonna be good tonight and get a salad, or oh, I'm gonna be bad tonight and get dessert. Like, no, if you start saying those things, you're just perpetuating diet culture. And it might sound innocent to you, but you never know what the person next to you is going through. My friends wouldn't have known it when they were saying that at the dinner table, that I was picking that up in my mind, and then that was justifying my behaviors and my eating disorder. So to give a little example about the stigma that I faced as a man, I figured I'd first show you my horrible haircuts from back in the 90s. Look at those bangs, yikes. So I hope the people at home can't see this, I don't know. But anyway, being a man in this space is interesting for me because there's not a lot of us that are speaking up yet about our battles with an eating disorder. But the truth is 1 in 4 eating disorder cases are male. It's just that men aren't talking about it. And one of the reasons is because of the stigma. And I can go back to 2nd grade and easily identify the stigma back then. I was on the elementary school playground playing, having a great time. All of a sudden a bee came along and stung me on my finger. And I was in a lot of pain. That stinger was stuck in there. Like this thing was swelling, it was hurting. But I wasn't going to tell a soul. There was no way I was going to tell my teacher, or no way I was going to tell my friends, and there was absolutely no way I was going to cry because I wasn't going to be a crybaby. Boys don't cry. Like I was going to get picked on already for being the fat kid. Like I did not need this on my resume as well. So I sat there all day just clutching my finger in class. I couldn't focus on anything else while my finger was throbbing like it really hurt. I got in the car that day when my mom picked me up from school, and she noticed right away, as moms always do. And she's like, nope, we're going home. She got the tweezers out, pulled that stinger out, put some ice on it, and the relief was instant. Like it started to feel good right away. I should have learned right then and there that if you talk about your problems, if you open up about your pain, you can begin to heal. But if you keep it suppressed and you keep it inside, it's just going to continue to swell and it's just going to continue to hurt. But unfortunately, that was a lesson I would have to learn the hard way. Another reason why a lot of guys don't speak up is because of the stereotypes. First of all, we probably think that eating disorders only happen to women. And the truth is, eating disorders do not discriminate at all. They can happen to anybody. So we need to dispel that stereotype right away. Also, the two types. I mentioned this earlier, but there are a lot more eating disorder types out there besides anorexia and bulimia. There's ARFID, there's binge eating disorder, there's OSFED, there's purging, there's orthorexia, which, like I said, is not an official diagnosis yet, but there's all these different types of eating disorders that exist that don't get talked about enough. So people think, oh, well, I'm not restricting or I'm not binging and purging, so I don't have an eating disorder. No, if food or exercise is starting to get in the way of your quality of life, if it's starting to impact your social life or just your mental well-being, if you find yourself sitting on the couch watching TV or I don't know, what do you watch nowadays, like TikTok or something, whatever you're doing, like, but then your mind starts to go to like food or diet or exercise, like maybe it's time to start to talk to somebody because if you can catch it early on, that's the way to go. I battled this thing for 20 years and I would not wish that upon anybody. And the last thing is there's a stereotype that still exists around mental illness. And I was guilty of this myself. I used to think that people who would talk about their mental illness were just looking for attention, that they were just being dramatic and making it up because you can't see it. Like if somebody's got a physical illness, you can see it. Like you can see them sneezing, you can hear them coughing. But if somebody's battling a mental illness, you don't necessarily see it. Like that picture I shared earlier where I was smiling the whole time, that was at one of my sickest points in my journey. So I think we need to dispel the stereotype around mental illness, that people with a mental illness are just those that might be stuck on their couch all day long or might not get out of bed for weeks and weeks on end. No, there are a lot of people that are still going about their regular daily lives and they're battling this. Every single day as I would get ready to leave the house, it was like, all right, got to put this mask back on and act like everything's great for the next 8 hours until I can get back home. So I think it's really important that we keep that in mind when it comes to just mental illness in general, especially eating disorders. See? So all this was happening. This storm was brewing. I was dealing with diet culture. So I thought what I was doing was the right thing. My friends and family were praising me for my discipline and dedication to diet and exercise. My doctors were praising me. Even my doctors could not see that I was battling an eating disorder because, one, they weren't looking for it because I was a guy, and two, because again, it didn't present in the typical way. It didn't present where I was necessarily restricting or purging or anything like that. So that was just being missed. I was listening to the stigma, so there was no way in the world I was actually going to speak up. So now what? I found myself at rock bottom in July of 2020, and it was just up the road here. I was in Cheyenne. My husband and I had gone out of town for a couple of days just to get away during the pandemic, and we went out to a restaurant, and already I was on edge because I didn't do well on vacation because suddenly my food rules and my routine were all being disrupted. And I finally, after 3 hours of searching, found a restaurant that met like the Jason bill of approval, or I guess the orthorexia bill of approval. And we got there and I asked to substitute the pita bread on the hummus platter for vegetables. Simple ask, right? Not a big deal. Well, unfortunately, they didn't have vegetables. So they're like, sorry, we only got the pita bread. I snapped. That was the moment I hit rock bottom, was over a slice of pita bread, but that's all it took. I just could not handle the pain I was experiencing any longer. And my husband voiced his concerns in that moment. And he was like, I see this pain, I see this grief, I see this insecurity. You've become so fixated on food. That's all you talk about now. Your personality is changing. It's gone from being optimistic and upbeat to being very pessimistic. I was starting to get angry and aggressive with people, looking to pick fights, which was completely out of my realm. And he kind of just spoke up and he shared those thoughts with me. And in that moment, I was like, wait a minute, something is going on. Like I should not be dealing with this much stress and anxiety around food or around the way that I look or any of this. And it was that conversation that I credit with saving my life. Because once I would finally connect with the doctor and receive my diagnosis, my medical team would have to monitor me very closely because I had gotten down to a physical weight and a physical condition where I was at risk of a sudden cardiac event. And they were worried about my life. They didn't know if I would be able to recover and survive. And that just goes to show how quickly things can escalate. We went from that picture in February of 2020 where I was smiling, and I guess from the outside, you could say I maybe looked quote unquote healthy, to where I was in the summer of 2020, where I was very sick and I couldn't sit down, I couldn't lay down, it just hurt too much. I was cold all the time. I would get dizzy if I stood up. Like, I got in really bad shape and things escalated very quickly. And that's one of the things that I've noticed in my work with eating disorders now, is that it can go from 0 to 60 very quickly. So if the problems start to present themselves, definitely start to have those conversations, whether it's with a loved one that you're concerned about, or if it's you yourself. Start to talk to people. Now with this, I'm gonna go ahead and be quiet for a little bit because I probably bored you all. So I'm gonna pass it off to Danny, who will liven the crowd back up, right? Yeah, see, he's got it. So I'm really excited to welcome Danny O'Connor. This is the first time that I had an opportunity to meet you. You reached out to me, and let me get that off. I am thrilled for everyone to hear more about your story.
Oh, thank you. This is the first time I've ever spoken, so it'll be the first for both of us. I want to thank Mr. Woods and ANAD for giving me this platform tonight to speak. It's deeply purposeful for me. I want to thank CU Boulder and the National Association of Mental Illness for putting this on. For anybody that's seeking insight for themselves or somebody they know, that's why I'm here. I'm not a speaker. I'm here because I want to say something that could potentially help your life or somebody that you know. So I hope that I do say something that you can bring home and help you. My name is Danny O'Connor, and I was a former Olympian for the United States boxing team. I was a two-time national amateur boxing champion. I was ranked #1 in the USA, and I traveled all over the world competing against the best athletes. I've been showcased on Showtime Sports, HBO, ESPN. And as a professional, I have 31 victories and a WBC International Championship title. So I remember when I got offered to fight for this welterweight championship belt of the world. This literally is the Super Bowl of boxing. And I had waited my whole life for this moment. That belt is the most iconic belt in the sport. Green leather straps, gold accents, and all the former champions. But that belt meant more than cementing myself in the sport, right? That belt was going to change my life and my family's life because it was going to bring money, fame, platform, right? Opportunities. And it was especially meaningful to me because I had come through so much adolescent trouble being at risk. I dropped out of high school. I was homeless, substance abuse. I was in trouble with the criminal justice system numerous times before I was even of adult age. I used the platform of boxing to completely change my whole existence. So you can imagine, I have waited my whole life for this opportunity that was here. That's a hard one to look at. I have never told this story till tonight. It went a little bit different in my mind. The paramedics took my lifeless and dead body out of my hotel room 2 hours before that dream would have come true. I didn't get to fight for that world championship belt, and my life changed, but not the way that I thought it was going to. I didn't step in the ring that night. I went to the ICU for many days. I was involved with some extreme weight cut tactics that put my life in serious risk. But, no. But what you don't know is that for 2 decades of my life, I had this all-consuming, growing, strengthening, manipulative eating disorder that I was trying to keep at bay while I continued to chase my dreams in the sport of boxing against the scale. And my eating disorder was all over the spectrum because of my athletic career and how it changed, right? Anorexic to bulimic before it settled on binge eating disorder, where it took all control, my mind and my body, all consuming. Every single aspect of my life was owned by the eating disorder. Every thought, every move I made, every single day. I had a hard decision to make at that time. I don't have a picture of a hard decision. I have a picture that makes my hard decisions easy. So that day, I knew I needed help with the eating disorder, specifically. My biggest fight wasn't inside the ring. I'll tell you that right now. My biggest fight was against this eating disorder. And it beat me down a lot. And it didn't care about medals or money or prizes. It wanted my life. And I was not going to lose this fight. So I stepped away from the sport of boxing. In my prime, I worked my whole life of sacrifice to get to the top of that pyramid. And I walked away from the sport, from the weight class, from the scale. My life is not worth a sport or a disorder of any kind. I knew I needed help with the eating disorder. So I left the sport and I focused all my attention on the eating disorder. Exactly like I would if I was training for a world championship fight. All of my energy and efforts and everything I did went to conquering this eating disorder. This thing had taken so much from me from so long in so many different ways. So I went to seek help for eating disorder as a male, and it was wild, but kind of in an amazing way. And like the way I trained for a fight, there was no rock unturned. I did everything and anything and multiple things because I wanted my life back. I went from intensive outpatient to psilocybin retreats in the mountain. It was everywhere, and I was doing anything. After 6 years out of the ring, not throwing one single punch, I wanted to go back to the sport of boxing, right? This was personal. I wanted redemption against the process that 6 years earlier had almost killed me, against the scale, against the eating disorder. And I understood the risk. I knew what it was, going back to the pressure, the scale, the rules, the discipline, the diet, the weight management. I knew the risk, but I did not care. This was a personal thing for me. So after 6 years out of the ring, I went back to the sport of boxing. I didn't use any weight cut tactics. I ate 1 hour before I got on the scale. I didn't cut any weight. I wasn't dehydrated. I didn't have an eating disorder that was deciding how this fight was going to go at that time. I weighed in at the same weight I would have 6 years prior if that fight had have happened. And when I got back in the ring, I won. A storybook win on TV in front of the whole world. But what people don't realize is it wasn't about the opponent. I don't even remember the opponent's name, to be honest. It wasn't about the opponent for me. That was my redemption on the scale, the weight, the eating disorder. And when I won that night, it was my victory over the eating disorder. That was the most meaningful fight I have ever stepped in the ring for my life, ever. When I was in Texas, I was at a training camp, and that's when my eating disorder was at its worst. I read this book by a professional athlete. It wasn't related to eating, but I used his mental health experience on myself to get through a rut. And I promised myself, if I was ever in a position to conquer this, if I was ever in a position to talk about my experience, that is what I was going to do. For so long during my struggle, I felt like I was on an island by myself, and it was lonely. And honestly, that's one of the first times I've ever heard a man talk and been like, oh, that's how powerful it is. And so an eating disorder is not just about food in and food out. It is so much more. And it doesn't matter what gender you are, what color you are, who your mama is, or where you come from. None of that stuff matters. And so for me, in closing, the rest of my message is not about me. This is going directly to any single person right now that's listening that is struggling with an eating disorder. Hang on. Hang on. You are not alone. You don't know who struggles with what. Some people just wear a better mask, like me. Like I did, make hope your non-negotiable. Don't give up. It's not going to happen overnight. It takes time, consistent effort. Don't give up. Find supports. If you don't have them, go find them, make them, build them. Build a team up around you and trust in that team. And when you fall, let them pick you up, because you will fall. For every one step I took forward, I took 15 backwards. I can't tell you how many times my wife had to pick me up because I couldn't. And lastly, time is precious. Don't waste it. If you need help, seek it now. Whatever help looks like for you, run towards it. Build yourself up emotionally, socially, mentally, physically, whatever it takes. Like your life might depend on it, because it could. Mine did. And your life is worth it too. That's the edited version. I've never spoken before, so I didn't know how it was going to play out. I tried to keep it short. I hope that something I said had some bit of impact on somebody to go do something different, make a change, and have a more positive life. Follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to build a following so I can tell my story all over the world. And if you think bringing me to speak to your community would be a benefit, go on my website and inquire. My bags are already packed. I appreciate the platform tonight, and it's awesome. It's awesome to be in the same room with every single person who could relate to something, because for so long, I didn't have that. And I had to figure it out on my own, and it was tough. And so when you have a community of people that are going through the same stuff, use it, connect with them, lean on them. Because when you do it alone, it's lonely. Thank you.
All right, so thank you so much, Danny. That was awesome. Let me get mic'd back up here really quick. Yeah, it is. It's so powerful to be able to share the stage with another man to talk about your eating disorder, because especially as a guy, eating disorders make you feel isolated and alone regardless of your gender, but especially as a man to be able to get up and to share your story. So I just applaud you, Danny, again for reaching out and for sharing your story. I guess I will touch upon just a couple closing remarks on my story before we go ahead and enter into questions here. But one of the things that I talked about early on was that stigma that we face. So what are some things that we can do to smash that stigma, to break through that stigma? One of the first things that I've learned is self-compassion, and to be able to kind of look at myself the way that my pet would look at me or my best friend would look at me. That might sound ridiculous, but give it a try sometimes. Like we're our own worst enemies. Like I used to have like the voice of Simon Cowell and Judge Judy going on in my ear, you know, Gordon Ramsay maybe shouting from the back. So be nice to yourself. Like that self-compassion can go a long way. Vulnerability is another one. And actually today is part, I don't know if you all know this here in Colorado, if you're watching at home right now, we've had 12 hours of conversation going on so far today about eating disorders at ANAD. And we were talking about vulnerability earlier, and somebody said, let's call it empowerment rather than vulnerability. And I love that idea. So rather than being vulnerable, empower yourself, share your story, speak up, talk about the things that are going on in your life, because you'll be able to empower other people in your life by doing the same. Also embrace those authentic emotions. For me, it would take a while to figure out what I was actually feeling. Oftentimes it would come across as anger. I felt angry all the time, but it really wasn't anger if I sat down and thought about it. I was sad. I was grieving. I was anxious. I was frustrated. I was all these other emotions, but I was just masking it as anger because, again, that's about the only form of emotion that a man can show in our society without somebody trying to take away your man card. And then the last one is my discomfort zone. I lived so long in my comfort zone, and that is where my eating disorder thrives. It was once I stepped out of my comfort zone where I started to thrive. Every single day, I'm not gonna lie, I wake up a little anxious, a little nervous, because I don't know what I'm about to embark on for today. But it's worth it. It is worth that risk. It's worth that little bit of anxiety every single morning, because I know that's where the growth happens. That's where the healing happens. So embrace your discomfort zone. Also, let's stop the stereotypes. I've already talked about that a little bit already, but there is no such thing as not being too sick or not sick enough to get help. If you're having any concerns, talk to someone. There's no tidy boxes either. You're not going to check all the boxes for one eating disorder type or another. It's going to be messy. There's a big gray area. There is no look for eating disorders. And again, I cannot stress this enough, eating disorders are not a choice. People don't wake up and wish this upon themselves. I guarantee you of that. Also, oh yeah, there's Arnie. I'm really missing him right now. He's back home in Michigan right now. So I think he's streaming in. So everybody wave at Arnie. But one of the things that I always try to do is remind myself of 6 little statements that I say every single day. And whether you want to put them on Post-it notes and put them up like on your window, or put them on your phone so that you get the reminder. It's, I am enough. I am worthy of help. I am never alone. It's okay to say no. It's okay to ask for help. And most importantly, especially for all the students here, it's okay to take a break. Like, you've got a lot of things going on your plate right now. You've got applications for this and that, and job interviews and coursework and just a whole lot. I was in college once. I know how this goes. So take a break. If you need to take that mental space for yourself, definitely reach out to your professor or to a counselor or to somebody. And if they're giving you a hard time, just give me their name, and I'll come back out here and take care of things for you. Also remember, these numbers are never going to define your worth or how much you're worth. A human cannot be measured in numbers. So any of these things you see on here right now, skip it. You're not going to be measured by numbers. So, okay, now we're gonna play around a little bit here. So this is the interactive portion, semi-interactive. But like, I've got these donuts and I've got a banana, two of my favorite foods. And when I ask people, what do you think is the healthiest option? People are always like, you dummy, it's the banana, duh. Like, why would you even ask that question? Well, let me give you a little bit of context on both of these. So the banana, I'm eating this in my car on my way to work. It's going to be my only breakfast. I'm feeling down in the dumps, depressed. I don't even know if it's organic. So eating it's probably going to contaminate my body and cause disease. So because of that, I'm not going to be able to have lunch. So yeah, this is the banana. Then we get the donuts. I'm enjoying these with one of my best friends who I haven't seen in a while. We're catching up on the good old days when we would make Krispy Kreme runs back in high school, or, we're just laughing and joking around and we're having a good time. So now let me ask you again, from a holistic perspective, when you include social health and mental health and physical health, what's the healthier option? I'm gonna lean more towards the donut in this case. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to start to recognize is in our society, we've become so fixated on physical health, or we've become so fixated on nutrition as being the only key indicator of health that we forget about the importance of mental health. We forget about the importance of our social health. So the next time you want to go have that donut and tell somebody it's healthy, because it is, and I said so. All right, and lastly, I just want to encourage all of you to be the change. So we all have a great opportunity in front of us. And first, I want to applaud your generation because you're doing a heck of a lot better job talking about mental health than my generation ever did. But we can all be the change when it comes to eating disorders and diet culture and all of that stuff. Number one, we've got to watch our mouths. We can't be, again, that person that says, I'm going to be bad tonight, or I'm going to be good tonight, or I got to get to the gym and burn this off. No, if I hear somebody say that, no, I'm out of here. We've got to redefine health. So go back to the donuts and the banana again to make sure health is a holistic perspective that we're taking. We've got to get a little uncomfortable. I'm sure Danny can attest to this too. It's not always the most comfortable to get up here and to start to share your story, but it's worth it because you never know who needs to hear it. If just one person gets that message, you've changed a life. And that's a pretty cool thing to know. And lastly, share your story. It doesn't matter what you've had to overcome, even if you had to overcome traffic here in Boulder or whatever, to get here tonight, you've overcome something to get to this point in your life. So share it, speak about those challenges, speak about those obstacles, because what you've experienced could be somebody else's roadmap to overcome the challenges that are going on in their lives. So keep those things in mind, and together we can all be the change, and we can erase these stigmas and the stereotypes that are preventing so many people from getting the help that they deserve. And with that, I will go ahead and close out. This is just one of my favorite quotes, by the way, but the words are the physicians of a mind diseased. And this is from my guy, Echelis. He got it back in like 500 BC, and we're still working on that now. Words are important, so speak up, talk, and share. And with that, I will go ahead and close out. If anybody here has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer.
I have a question for both of you, two separate questions. For Jason, how did you learn about orthorexia and how to combat it? And for Danny, how common would you are in professional, very strict like weight classes that you have to adhere to?
Both really good questions. For orthorexia, I stumbled across in a book. So in my recovery, I took a very kind of academic approach, I guess you could say, to recovery. Like I wanted to learn as much as I could about eating disorders and hear other people's experience with an eating disorder. And I was reading somebody's book and I came across this term orthorexia and I had no idea what it meant. At that point, I had been diagnosed with an unspecified eating disorder. So it didn't really even sound that serious to me. And I looked up orthorexia, And it said, a fixation with healthy, clean eating. And I was like, wait a minute, that's exactly what I've been dealing with. Bingo, that's it. And in that moment, everything clicked. That was when I realized I really do have an eating disorder. It's not just some weird relationship with food. So again, it was because somebody else decided to share their story that I was able to put a label and an identity I had been battling. And it was so crucial to me in my recovery.
So listen, I do love wrestling, right? Because I started wrestling when I was 10. I started wrestling against the scale first before I found boxing. And then when I found boxing, terms, right? So my take on it is it could be very common, but nobody talks about it. Anytime you go against the scale, the longer you go against it, the more you ingrain these habits and these grooves and these things over time. It's hard to get away from those things. It's hard to get away from those things, right? So nobody talks about it because listen, if I'm a Division I and I'm trying to win something, or in boxing, if I'm trying to win a world championship belt, if I can't make that weight, or if somebody thinks I can't make that weight, I'm bad business, right? I might not make that weight. And now other things are affected besides just that weigh in that fight. So I didn't want to tell anybody about anything that was involved in the sport. And the thing that I thought was gonna, have all my dreams come true, I wasn't gonna tell anybody, nobody, not one single person. The only reason it came out is because when you get to an elite camp, you can't hide it. They had me on the scale every day. They had everything monitored. And when I show up and there's a fluctuation of 10 pounds in one night, people that don't understand start going, what is going on right now? And I couldn't hide it. And that's why it came out. But that's my take. I mean, and I was telling the doctor before, like boxing, wrestling, like your biggest risk is that scale, right? I didn't have that person when I was young, when there was less advances in like weight management and how you made weight. I didn't have anyone telling me like, oh, this isn't the right way. 10 years down the line, you keep doing that, you might be in trouble. I didn't have that. I just had suffer in silence, do what I needed to do, get myself on the mat or in the ring, and then move on. So like any other culture, if you don't talk about it, who knows? But I know what I was doing and at times when I did it with other people, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my take on the scale.
Thank you. I want to thank both of you so much for your bravery and your courage on speaking this. It's really helpful. I have a question for both of you, really. What advice would you give to someone who's had an eating disorder and they've recovered and they want to get back into that fitness and that gym space because they do find comfort in it? But what is your advice for doing that? And this is such a stigmatized word, but like a healthier way than and not making it compulsive and obsessive like it was before.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's the word that I hate, balance, because the balance just seems impossible. And first of all, I'm really bad at balance, which is probably why we had to move away from Colorado because I can't ski or snowboard. So it's just really bad. But for me, I've loved to be active. I like to compete. I like to do different physical activities. So it was very difficult to feel like I was going to have to give that up. That was like my biggest fear in recovery. So it's been about being able to find balance. And one of the ways that I do that is I ask myself every single day, am I working out right now? Am I going to the gym because I want to, because I enjoy this, because I've got a goal that's not like weight specific or appearance specific? And if the answer is yes, then I'll continue. If not, maybe it's time to take that day off from the gym because I'm going to the gym now because it's, discipline or because I ate something and I got to work it off. Like if I'm going to the gym for that, then yeah, I've got to stop that. So for me, it's being very mindful and asking that question. And one of the things that I really got into this while I was in my recovery, but rock climbing. I love to go rock climbing. So I became very passionate about that. So now when I work out, that's my goal. I want to get stronger to be able to do that. I'm not doing it because I feel like I have to work out or because I want to look a certain way. And I think that for me, that was really important, finding that balance.
These ones are harder when you don't have it pre-script because you got to go off the top of your head. But I would say for me, it was all a mental, emotional thing when it came to that stuff, right? Because I want to be healthy as a lifestyle. I want to live long so that I can have grandkids and play with my kids. So I want to be healthy. I want to exercise. Exercise was a big part of my life for a long time. So for me, I had to remove all the mental barriers and the emotional barriers. I had to take away all the rules. If I didn't work out today, whatever, that's what it was. I'll go, I had one thing. For an hour a day, I'm gonna do something. If it's walk or exercise or run or something, right? And so I had to like get over all these rules that I had in place when it came to food or exercise or diet and all these mental things that if I didn't then follow those rules, set me off. And so when I went back to the sport of boxing, I understood the risk that was involved. But it had my senses on high. Every meal I sat down, I was thinking in the back of my head. Every time I stepped on the scale or near it or thought about it, like I was very aware of what I was thinking, how I was reacting, everything. So I was super in tune with everything, knowing how dangerous it was, right? Because whenever you're going back towards something that had such an effect on you, there's a ton of danger there, okay? And everything worked out great. But then I go to Boston, I get around some Puppuccino's pizza. You laugh, but I had a 3.5 day binge where my wife had to put the coffee beans on all the throw up, right? And I hadn't done that in years. It shook me up so bad. You know why? Because I thought I was good. I'm cured forever. I haven't done nothing. I'm cool. I'll do whatever I want. I'm good. And I didn't catch the thoughts. I was lying to myself. And then those thoughts kept going and then they add up, and every time I walk by and then all of a sudden it got me, it pulled me in and I couldn't get out for a while. And it was the scariest thing ever. And after that day, I realized I may be good forever, but me and food have history. We have a relationship together. So not at any time will I ever take that lightly again, whether I'm exercising, eating, going out to dinner, whatever. It's always in the back of my head now because I thought I was good forever. I thought I conquered this thing. I went back to boxing. I went back to the scale. No problem. And then I let my guard down. So for me, just don't let your guard down. Just, everything you went through, right? You know everything you went through. So you can still have a very healthy lifestyle, doing healthy things because it's about the quality of your life, but just keep it in the back of your head. Don't ever forget your history. You know what I mean? And how that affected you. No problem.
Yeah, just to kind of echo that really quick, like the one thing I've learned about recovery is it's a journey. It's an ongoing process. I can get up here and speak. We were talking about this beforehand. I think the third or fourth time that I've come here to speak. I'm still healing. I'm more healed than I was the first time I was here. And if I come back next year, if I haven't bored you all too much, like I will probably be more healed next year. But it's one of those things where it's ongoing. So it's not like a switch where you just flip it and it's gone and the eating disorder disappears. It is definitely an ongoing journey, but it's one that I'm starting to win the battle. So yeah, I think there's another question.
Yes. How do you support someone in your life who has an eating disorder? Because even if you're not battling it, probably someone you know is. And I know you have your husband, you have your wife, you talked about them. How do you support someone else?
Yeah, it's a great question. We should have the spouses here next time to answer that. But one of the things that I get asked a lot in my role at ANAD is how do I support somebody? How do I start that conversation, or how do I be there to help someone? And the very first thing that I tell everybody is do not come across like you're accusing the other person. Always approach them with those I statements rather than the you statements. Express what's on your mind, what you're concerned about, but don't maybe point out specific behaviors or what you see that they're doing. And that's a really good way to approach maybe initial conversations. And then moving along as somebody's progressing through recovery, engage with them as a person. Make sure that not every question is going to be around food or around their eating disorder recovery. Like people get sick of that. They're already, eating disorders take up all your mental space anyway. So just be their friend. Just be there to talk about their interests, their hobbies, get to know the person still behind the eating disorder. And for me, that was one of the best things that could support me, and it kept me grounded. So whether it was my treatment team or whether it was my husband, it was great to have somebody there who just wanted to get to know Jason and who I was outside of the eating disorder. Of course, it was always helpful to have somebody there to listen to me when I wanted to vent. Just remember, if you're supporting somebody, you don't have to fix their problems. You don't have to solve everything. I'm a problem solver. I want to go in and, I'll put together a spreadsheet and solve the whole thing. But eating disorders don't work like that. So also keep that in mind too, that sometimes just listening is the most powerful thing you can do. So make sure that person knows that there's a space there where they can vent, they can express their frustrations, they can celebrate their wins along the way, and you don't have to say anything at all, but just listen.
For me, it was love, unwavering, unbroken love that my wife gave me that got me through a lot of times. She never made me feel bad about anything. She never made me question anything, but she was always there. My wife is the only one on the face of this planet that really knows the depths of what I went through because she was next to me the whole time. And she didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to do anything. She just needed to be there. And that's it. And so for me, that constant support just next to me, knowing that like, because when I was doing what I was doing, there was no part of me that wanted to. I couldn't control it. I couldn't stop. You know how much of a mind bend it, well, I'm sure a lot of you know how much of a mind bend it is when your brain is telling you something different and your body and your actions can't control it. And you're like, I can control almost anything I've ever tried to do. And so she never made me feel bad. She was just always there for me, there with me. And I was hurting big time, and she knew it. And so she never took that love away. It was always there, no matter what, no matter how low or how bad I felt about myself or how much I hated myself. It was always there for me to see. And so that was big. That was huge for me. And the same for my kids. My kids, the love is always there. And the kids were more of a reminder. Every time I see those kids, all right, I got to do better. I got to do a little bit better. And that's what I was talking about with the hope. Like, I probably woke up for a decade every single day trying to be better and failing, and then have to wake up again and be like, this much more down the ladder to start all over. Every day was like starting over for so long. But I never needed to start over with the love. It was always there. It was always there every time I looked around.
And the one thing I would add too is humor. It might sound twisted, but humor in recovery is definitely needed. So my husband was always there for like a joke or, just to make me laugh. And it was so important. People might be like, you shouldn't be laughing. You're in eating disorder recovery. No, you need the laugh then. Like, that's what you really need, the humor.
One time I went to dinner with my wife and I was mid-binge and it was a mess. I literally was like, I'm not going to get anything. And if we were with a group of people, she nudged me. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, you order what I like, and I'll have this one.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Mhm.
So when she could do little stuff like that and make me laugh and just for a split second take me out of that struggle, it meant the world to me.
Yeah.
The absolute world.
Thank you so much for both of you telling your story, and we really appreciate the empowerment that you're talking about, and two, something that I have always been really fascinated about is sometimes the right question can get you to start thinking about something. So you both talked about this sense of isolation, that you were by yourself, that no one really understood you for so long. You can mask that you're doing fine for so long. Now that you've gone through this journey of silently suffering to now publicly advertising that it's okay to ask for help. What would be some questions that, if you were to go back those 6 years, if somebody would have asked these questions, such as like, how often are you thinking about your food consumption, or, how often are you weighing yourself? Are those some questions, or can you think of any other questions that would have prompted you to think maybe this isn't normal?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the areas where that would have been really important for me is with my doctors. And that's one area where unfortunately we're still lacking when it comes to just basic mental health evaluations that happen when you go see your primary care physician. I would go to my doctor every single year. They check my blood pressure, they check my pulse, they do my blood work, but they never asked any questions about my mental health. So nobody was ever asking me, what's really going on in there, or what is your relationship like with diet and exercise? At one point, I had a personal trainer who I was working with, and he was sitting there applauding me for what I was doing too. He was never like, "Hey, like, how often are you really checking out the scale, or what are you really eating?" Like, he was just trusting my words as I was completely fudging the paperwork. So I think it was just little examples like that throughout the way, where if somebody would have maybe had talked more about those things or asked me those questions, I probably would have opened up, because I wasn't necessarily, at least in my case, I wasn't hiding it. It was just, I didn't even recognize it myself. So I needed some of those questions to be asked so that I could start to think about it and process it.
That's a hard question for me because it's completely different, right? Even if I don't have an eating disorder and I'm fighting, I'm on the scale 7 times a day, right? Because it's my career, right? So like, people aren't going to ask me about my scale or about the weight, and even when there's fluctuations, right? Because that's boxing. All of a sudden, you have a 20-pound fluctuation, Roberto Duran, and then now you're making weight, Ricky Hatton. I mean, that's the culture of kind of the sport of boxing. So I don't think those questions are going to come out too much. I think there was a lot of visible signs, obviously. I mean, I had fluctuations in my weight that were, we're talking about like 50 pounds I would take off to make weight. I boxed at 139 pounds my whole career from when I was 16 until I left. And so you had these crazy weight fluctuations where you could see, I mean, visibly, I was bloated, so you could have dove deeper a little bit. But again, the mask, you're never going to get inside if I don't want you to. You start digging, I'm out. And I've done it a million times. You ain't going to talk to me. I'm not going to talk to you, because you're not going to jeopardize everything I've worked for, right? So if you get too close, I'm out, right? I took a shower in the dark for 2 years so I didn't have to look at myself, right? We're talking about isolation to the fullest. Plus, it's a sport of boxing, right? It's a little bit different. So, for me, it was a little bit different. Like, no, people in my sport, they're not really going to question that stuff. It's just, if you make your weight, you make your fight, and you go about, right? And so I'm not sure there's anything anybody could have said to me, you know what I mean? Until I realized it, right? Because 2012, I knew that my tactics were highly abnormal, and I knew at different times they were uncontrolled. But I always thought, all right, cool. When it's time to make weight and go back into training camp, I'll switch gears. And I did for a long time, until it got harder to switch gears and harder. And then there was no gear. I couldn't switch anything, right? And so for a long time, I just thought, whatever, this is what I do. I starve myself, I make weight. Then I gain 50 pounds because I eat whatever I want. And then I take it all off to make weight again, right? When I'm done with boxing, I'll be done with that, which was wrong. And then when I realized one day, when I tried to stop doing that because I had a huge fight coming up and it didn't stop, I said, wait a minute, right? What's going on now? Like, literally, I'm trying to stop and I can't control this, right? And so that's when I realized I got it. And I was in Texas, 2012. I got an eating disorder. And then the next thought was, what is an eating disorder, right? Because I come from Boston, right? You AA on every corner, like there's drunks, like fentanyl took out, like I understand addiction, right? And if you're looking at eating disorder, it's always something deeper that's just the end route. So when I first realized it, I literally had that thought of, what is an eating disorder? And so for me, I'm not sure there's anything that you could have asked me when I wasn't ready to tell you. That's how secretive, that's how isolated I am, that's how protected I am. And there's no way you would have got in that shield. And if there was a chance I thought you would have, I'm out and you'll never see me again. Then when I realized it and I became more like, okay, I need help and I'm going to get help in any possible way I can, then I was ready to come share. And when I'm ready to come share, then yes, I want to hear it from everybody. You know, what are you doing? Oh yeah, I'm doing that too. Well, I can't do this. How do you do that? All day. But until I'm ready for that, you ain't getting inside this thing. There's only one person in the world that's in here, and that's my wife. So I don't know if that helps, but it's a different,
Very honest.
Yeah.
Psychology joke that I've heard that how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Just takes one. The light bulb wants to be changed, and it's going to take a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great one. That is hilarious.
So my question is more specifically for your story, Jason. I'm just curious about whether you think being part of the LGBTQ community sort of affects your relationship with eating disorders, and whether that particular community maybe has a different relationship to eating disorders than the general population.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for starters, some of it comes from that insecurity. So again, we're trying to mask something, we're trying to hide something. So we become very insecure and we feed into that insecurity and we're looking for some sort of control. For the longest time, I felt like I wasn't good enough. I grew up in a very conservative religious family. And when I was coming to terms with my sexuality, it made me feel like an utter failure, again, to go back to that one slide. So it was just a contributing factor to the development of that eating disorder. And then in the LGBTQ community, there's so much pressure to look a certain way, or, you know, you're expected to look a certain way as a guy or whatnot. So there's that added pressure too. And you kind of just, you compound all of that into one and it becomes extremely challenging. One thing that I share with people is, as a gay guy, like, I'm attracted to the same bodies that trigger me, that I then start to compete with. And, you know, I feel, you know, the competition there. So it's an interesting dynamic there that I've got to experience too. But we had a conversation earlier today as part of the day of conversation where we talked about eating disorders in this community. And I think one of the biggest things that we talked about is that even within the community, we perpetuate those stereotypes and we often, you know, expect people to look a certain way, or we will bully and harass people if they don't look a certain way or fit that mold that they should for their identity. So definitely, I think that plays into the development of the eating disorder, and then it also contributes to people not getting the help that they need as soon as they need it, because maybe this person, you know, is not connected with their family, so they don't have the loved ones there to support them or to help them get the resources they need. There's also higher rates of food insecurity among members of the LGBTQ plus community, and food insecurity can then play a factor in the development of an eating disorder. So there are multiple factors there. And one of the statistics that I saw from the Trevor Project is that LGBTQ youth are 3 times likelier to develop an eating disorder than their straight counterparts. So it's definitely one of those things that we're seeing, and we need to do more research on, and we need to create more resources.
Okay, hi. So you guys both talked a lot about your journey of realizing you had an eating disorder, but I was kind of curious how you came over the hurdle of truly accepting you had an eating disorder. Because I feel like a lot of people fall in this boat of maybe being aware of eating disorders and even recognizing it in other people, but they can't like get to where they can accept they actually have one because they view it as, I'm just being healthier, I'm just doing what I have to do, and especially in sports, it's just kind of part of what you signed up for. So I'm just curious how you actually got to the point of like accepting you had one.
Yeah, for me, it was interesting. Like, it just happened in the course of a conversation I was having with my dietitian one day. up until that point, I was probably 4 or 5 months into my recovery journey. I would always refer to it as a weird relationship with food. Like I would not say the words eating disorder. And then just in conversation with her one day, I'm like, yeah, so battling this eating disorder. And she's like, stop, wait, what did you say? And like, it was a groundbreaking moment. And it just kind of, I guess it came naturally. It was just one of those things where after reading other people's experiences with an eating disorder, I guess I was starting to see my own story in their stories, and I could relate to it. So I was starting to find that community. And if that community meant I had to put the label of eating disorder on it, then I was willing to do that because at least it made me feel not so alone, not so isolated any longer. So I guess it was kind of just a gradual learning experience to get there. But now, like, that I was able to put the label like with orthorexia, when you asked about orthorexia earlier, and then with an eating disorder, it really helped me find the people that I needed to find to continue my healing journey. So it was a monumental step in the recovery journey, but it definitely took some time because there for a long time, it was just my quote unquote weird relationship with food.
I think accept's a pretty loaded word. I don't know that I've ever accept. I hate that thing. And I listen, I have this, I have professional help that we talk about it, and like she's always like giving it, like she's always like being nice to it, like, oh well, what did it do for you, and how? And I'm like, no, I hate that thing. If it was an opponent, I would fight it. You know what I mean? So I accepted that it got in, and I had it, and that was a part of my life now. But I never accepted that that was, even when I didn't know. I always never accepted the fact that this is how it was going to be. I always moved towards getting this thing out of me. And I just didn't know if I was ever going to get there. It was so long and such a long road. I just didn't know if it was ever going to get there. And like, this is just the rest of life. But I never accepted that aspect of it. I may have accepted that it snuck in, or I was in delusion, or I reinforced these habits over years and years, and now it was a part of my life. I accepted that. To be honest, I felt less than a lot of the time, right? Because I got all these guys talking about booze and drugs, and I'm like, well, I got this eating disorder, you know what I mean? And so for me, I think the not accepting it a little bit was like a lot of motivation the whole time. Like, this is not how life's going to be. I don't care if it takes me 15 years. I'm kicking this thing. And so because I went with that approach, a lot of those days, it gave me motivation to just be a little bit better, do something different, or just not give up even after so long of trying it. I think once I accepted the fact that it snuck in and it was part of me now, that made it easier for me to now go talk about it and then try to find connection, which I didn't find. One time I found a guy and he was far away and he didn't even write back. And after like a while of searching, I just gave up. I'll figure this thing out myself. And don't get me wrong, I spoke to a lot of people, but there's just a different type of connection. No, even if we're speaking the same language, it doesn't matter. There's just a little bit of a different connection than when I talk and we're speaking the same language. And so the acceptance of it, this is life, this is what's in me now. It allowed me to like open up more and like go seek help, I guess. But how this was not something I was ever willing to. I still don't. I still will never accept it. Like, you know what I mean? But now I'm a lot more cautious about it because of that last time. I didn't think that was ever going to happen either. But
two of the things that I was going to add there is one, it goes back to kind of how we use our words again. And I always encourage people, don't say you're an anorexic or you're a bulimic, because you're giving that eating disorder your identity. I'm a person that's struggling with this eating disorder, but it's just those little things like that can really play a mind trip on you. And also, I have to admit that I think Danny reached out to me over the weekend to my work email, and I could not respond fast enough. Like, it was just so, it's one of those things where it's like when you're able to make those connections and be able to find somebody else who's got that lived experience, it's really something special. So yeah, I was like, I remember I was watching some sports or something, and I was like, all right, this football game can wait, because I gotta email this guy back and find out more, because unfortunately there's not too many of us sharing our stories yet.
Maybe one more question.
I had a question for both of you because I want both of your perspectives on this, but I think being from Boulder, it's a very health conscious like community. Like everything is about eating healthy, always skiing, always running. Like the Boulder community is very active and we're very conscious about what we eat. And like for some people, I think that's a very triggering environment to be around that all the time. And I know you guys talked about like what triggered you. Like you were always like being weighed and that made you very conscious and like you're always thinking about what you eat. So like for people who are like in that situation where they can't escape those triggers just because that's the community we grew up in, like what advice would you have to help those people out, like kind of escape the culture while taking care of themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, when we first moved here, we lived down in Denver, but I worked up here in Boulder, and my office only had like 15 people, but you should have seen the dietary restrictions on that list for the catering that I used to have to order. Like it was, she's like, yeah, this is Boulder for you. And then while I was in the Target, somebody was like, yeah, if you don't have a dietary restriction, you're not from Boulder, because it's so true. It is such a health conscious place. So the one thing that I guess I would say to that is to find the other things in your life that give you value and give you meaning and that are your strengths. What you eat and how you exercise are probably some of the most least interesting things about you. You've got all these other talents, you know, all these other interests and hobbies. So you know, look into those and focus on those. And yeah, they might be sporty, they might be athletic related, but don't let that become your entire identity. And if you start to hear people that are maybe starting to, you know, encroach on those boundaries, set some strong boundaries where it's like, I don't want to talk about dieting all the time, or I don't want to hear about your newest workout plan. Like tell your friends that, like set those boundaries and hold them. It might cause a little discomfort at first, but in the long run, you're prioritizing your mental health. So it's being able to recognize what you want to talk about, and then, you know, enforcing a boundary here and there when you need to. I still have friends that come over and they'll tell me about their latest diet plan. And I'm like, hello, I'm an eating disorder recovery advocate. I work at a national eating disorder association. Like, and it's like, they will talk about their diets or talk about good food and bad food. And it's like, it's just everywhere these days.
This is like the most challenging part, answering these questions. I don't even know how to answer that. I don't. But what I can tell you from my experience is that when I first realized what an eating disorder was and that I was affected drastically, my approach was fix it from the outside in, right? Oh, it's an eating disorder. We're going to work on why am I eating too much or whatever, right? Outside in. And then I went like on this long journey. And then I realized, okay, actually that approach is not working that good. I had to go from the inside out. Okay. Once I started going from the inside out, I'm comfortable in my own skin. I could care less what any of y'all are doing or what you say about me or what you're thinking, like zero, because I'm comfortable in my own skin. But that didn't come overnight. That came over years and years and years of doing emotional work, of building my confidence, of growing up, of getting older, right? It took a long time to get there. And so for me, I can be in any situation in life and not be triggered and not care and not be affected by it. Plus being an athlete helps me a lot because at the end of the day, it's all just noise, right? And I'm really good at focusing in away from that noise. So being an athlete helped me, right? But in the early years when I wasn't like that, I avoided a lot. You know, I didn't do stuff that made me uncomfortable. I was good at speaking up, like you said, with the boundaries. If something made me uncomfortable, sorry, I'm out. I'm out of here. I don't want to go. You know, oh, we're going here. Nope, I'm not going. Sorry, dude. And I never gave in to peer pressure. Never. You know what I mean? When I was at a certain age. So like, you got to worry about you. That's it. You have to worry about you. And I'm not saying that's it, like you don't have loved ones, but I'm saying when it comes to your mentality, you have to think about you and you have to make those moves on a daily basis that are going to be best for you, for your future, for your disorder, whatever, right? And you have to make those moves. And some of those moves are going to be hard. They're going to take you away from something, or they're going to make you feel a little bit more uncomfortable because you're not going with the norm of life, right? And you just have to start getting comfortable with you're doing the best thing for you. And it doesn't matter what people say or what people think or what the culture is or what they're not doing, right? You just have to do what's good for you. And then as you keep getting older and more mature and you keep doing the work, and that's what I was saying, like, it doesn't happen overnight. Like, it's easy for me to say that now, but that took me 20 years to get to that spot. Like, I used to drastically care what people thought, you know what I mean? I used to have to take my clothes off and get on the scale in front of the whole world. I hated it. You know what I mean? So like, it takes a long time of doing that emotional work on the inside, and then it will reflect on the outside. Like, when you do that hard work too, like, stuff becomes non-issues. You're not even thinking about it anymore because you're so comfortable in your own skin. You know what I mean? I don't know if that helped, but that's like kind of how I approached it.
Okay, I think we're done. Thank you guys so much. Let's give them another round of applause. We really thank you all for coming tonight. Have a great night.
All right, thank you, everyone. And just for all of our people streaming at home, this is it. We've done 12 hours of conversation around eating disorders. Yeah, there's like 800 people out there right now. So we've done it. So thank you, everybody, for having us here tonight. And take care, everyone on the stream.